For a man worth billions, Marcus Thorne was willing to ruin a woman's life over a simple hand-carved wooden bird. His maid, Elena Ortiz, was publicly shamed and framed for the theft of a $50,000 watch, her savings for her brother's critical surgery suddenly frozen. Her last resort was Arthur Vance, a once great lawyer. Now so haunted by failure, he advised every client to surrender. He saw a hopeless case. She saw a man whose belief in justice wasn't dead, just sleeping. In a battle against a ruthless millionaire, the real question wasn't if a maid could be proven innocent, but if her unbreakable hope could force a broken man to fight for his own soul.
This is TS Simple Serene Stories. Before we get back to this touching story, I have a quick question for you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that humanity and miracles are eternal, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Now, let's get back to the story.
The silence in Arthur Vance's office was a thick, suffocating thing, broken only by the hum of ancient fluorescent lights overhead. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon sun, slanting through the grimy window, illuminating stacks of files that listed like sinking ships. On the windowsill, a desiccated plant had long ago surrendered, its brittle leaves a testament to forgotten care. Arthur, a ghost haunting the ruins of a once promising career, murmured into his phone, his voice a monotone drone as he negotiated the final, soul-crushing details of a fender-bender settlement. Yes, a 10% reduction on the deductible is acceptable. Just send the paperwork. He ended the call, and the silence rushed back in, deeper this time. His gaze drifted to a beautiful antique mantel clock sitting on a bookshelf, its hands frozen at 3:15, its intricate gears clogged with years of neglect. It had been a gift from his father, a man who believed anything could be fixed with patience and the right tools. Arthur now knew better. Some things, once broken, stayed that way. His hand, almost of its own accord, went to the top drawer of his mahogany desk. He pulled it open, revealing not pens or paper clips, but a single folded piece of paper, its creases softened by countless openings and closings. It was a suicide note. He didn't need to read the words. They were seared onto his soul. You gave me hope, then you took it all away. A flash of memory, sharp and cruel. A younger, more arrogant Arthur in a courtroom, so sure of his own brilliance that he'd overlooked a crucial piece of evidence, a simple shipping manifest that would have exonerated his client, Robert Miller. A manifest he found 2 days too late. The memory ended, as it always did, with the sound of Miller's widow sobbing on the other end of the phone. That was the day the clock in his office stopped ticking. That was the day Arthur Vance gave up on justice. 50 blocks away, in a penthouse that scraped the sky, Elena Ortiz moved with a practiced, almost invisible grace. Here, silence was not an absence, but a command. It was the sterile quiet of polished marble, gleaming chrome, and glass walls that looked down on the city like a disdainful god. This was the world of Marcus Thorne, and in his world, perfection was the only acceptable standard. Elena's movements were precise, her expression placid, but her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. As she emptied a wastebasket in the catering kitchen, her eyes darted to 2 unopened bottles of expensive wine left over from last night's gala. They were destined for the trash, an insignificant surplus in a world of obscene excess. To her, they were 2 more weeks of Leo's medication. With a seamless motion, she slipped the bottles into a specially lined compartment of her cleaning tote. It was a small silent transgression, one of many. For 3 months, she had been selling these discarded scraps of a billionaire's life: outdated tech, untouched catering supplies, complimentary gift bags, funneling the money into a secret account labeled "For Leo." It felt wrong, a corrosion of her own integrity. But the thought of her brother's smile, strained as it was by his illness, made it feel necessary. A vibration in her pocket. She ducked into a supply closet, the scent of industrial bleach sharp in her nostrils, and pulled out her phone. A text from the hospital. "Hi, Elena. Just a reminder that we need the down payment for Leo's surgery scheduled by the 15th to hold his spot." She closed her eyes. The 15th was a week away. The Leo Fund was close, but not close enough. A quiet desperation gnawed at her, a cold counterpoint to the fierce, protective love that drove her. Unseen, unheard, a tiny camera lens embedded in the ceiling tracked her every move. In his security monitoring room 2 floors below, Marcus Thorne watched the playback. He saw the wine bottles disappear into the bag. He'd been watching for weeks, ever since David Chen, his former security chief, had been fired for having too much of a conscience. Thorne had taken a more personal interest in his staff's activities, and he noticed Elena's pattern. He didn't see a desperate sister. He saw a rat in his walls, an imperfection, a tiny crack in the absolute control he demanded. Her quiet defiance was an intolerable insult. He would not just fire her. He would make an example of her. He would crush her so completely that no one in his employ would ever dream of stepping out of line again. The plan was already in motion. An hour earlier, under the guise of a routine fire safety check, Thorne's new loyal security head had accessed the staff lockers, planting a $50,000 Patek Philippe watch, Thorne's own, deep inside Elena's handbag. At the end of her shift, Elena joined the other staff members in the locker room, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. Suddenly, Thorne himself swept in, flanked by 2 guards. His presence sucked the air out of the room. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth as silk and cold as ice. "We've had a report of a missing item, a personal item of great value. To be fair to everyone, we will be conducting a search of all lockers and bags." Panic flared in the room, but Elena felt a specific, cold dread. One by one, the guards moved down the line. When they reached her, they opened her locker and pulled out her handbag. The search was brief. The guard pulled out the gleaming, diamond-studded watch. Gasps echoed in the small room. Elena stared, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I don't know how that got there." "You don't?" Thorne asked, stepping forward. He feigned a look of deep disappointment. "Then perhaps you can explain the other items you've been taking?" He nodded to the guard, who pulled out the 2 bottles of wine from her tote. The blood drained from Elena's face. I was going to... They were being thrown out," she stammered, the confession to the lesser crime sealing her fate for the greater one. "Of course they were," Thorne said, his voice dripping with contempt. He looked around at the other staff members, his gaze a warning. This is what happens when we forget our place, when we take what is not ours. He turned back to Elena, his face a mask of cold fury. "You're fired, and I'm pressing charges." Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. She was escorted out of the building, her pleas of innocence lost in the sterile marble lobby. She wasn't just losing her job, she was losing everything. She was losing Leo. The hours at the police station were a blur of fluorescent lights, the smell of stale coffee, and the cold, impersonal language of the law. Her Leo fund was frozen, flagged as proceeds of crime. Her one phone call was to her aunt, a frantic, whispered conversation to make sure someone was with her brother. The next day, she went to a legal aid office. The paralegal was kind, but her face fell when she saw Marcus Thorne's name on the police report. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice full of pity. "We can't fight him. Nobody can. He'll bury us in legal fees before we even get to court." She handed Elena a crumpled list of lawyers who took on low-fee or pro bono cases. "It's a long shot," the woman admitted. Elena's finger traced down the list of names, past the firms with glossy websites and impressive addresses, all the way to the bottom. There, under the heading General Practice, was a name: Arthur Vance. His office was even more neglected up close. Elena stood in the doorway, taking in the dust, the dead plant, the silent clock. Arthur didn't look up when she entered, merely gesturing to the cracked leather chair opposite his desk. She told her story, her voice quiet but steady. Arthur listened with half an ear, already knowing how this ended: a maid versus a millionaire. It was a legal execution, not a case. "Take the plea deal," he said when she finished, his voice raspy with disuse. He finally looked at her, his eyes weary and devoid of light. "You can't win. A man like Thorne doesn't lose. He'll ruin you. You'll get probation, maybe some community service. It's the best you can hope for." He was projecting, giving her the same advice he wished he had given Robert Miller, the advice to surrender. Elena didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze unwavering. Her eyes drifted to the broken clock on his shelf. "My father taught me how to fix clocks," she said, her voice soft but clear in the silent room. "He was a watchmaker. He used to say that nothing is truly broken forever. Sometimes it just needs a little push to start again." She stood up, her dignity a shield around her. "I did not steal that watch, Mr. Vance. My brother is sick, and he needs me. If I say I did this, I am telling him that my integrity is for sale. It is not." She walked to the door and paused, her hand on the knob. "I was told you used to believe in justice. It doesn't disappear just because you stop looking for it." She left, closing the door gently behind her. The silence she left in her wake was different. It was questioning. Arthur stared at the door, her words echoing in the dusty air. He looked at the case file on his desk, then at the silent, broken clock on the shelf. For the first time in 5 years, a flicker of something he thought long dead, a stubborn, defiant spark, stirred within him. He picked up the phone and dialed the district attorney's office. "My name is Arthur Vance," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "I'm representing Elena Ortiz, and we will not be taking the plea. The decision to fight was one thing. The fight itself was another." For the first time in 5 years, Arthur felt the ghost of his former self stir, a reluctant curiosity that propelled him out of his chair and into the machinery of the law. He filed the initial paperwork with a rusty determination, his hands feeling clumsy on the keyboard, his legal vocabulary stiff from disuse. He sent a formal request to the DA for the discovery package, and a week later, a thick manila envelope landed on his desk with a thud that felt like a challenge. He spread the contents across his desk. The police report, the sworn statement from Thorne's head of security, and the log for the security cameras. It didn't take a brilliant legal mind to see the cracks. It just took one that was willing to look. The security guard statement was a masterpiece of rehearsed perfection, each sentence polished, each detail conveniently supporting the narrative of Elena's guilt. It was too clean. Then there was the camera log. The camera covering the staff locker area had been, according to the report, offline for a 20-minute window for routine maintenance. The window, of course, perfectly coincided with the time the watch was planted. It was sloppy, arrogant work. The kind of work done by a man who never expected to be questioned. Armed with this sliver of leverage, Arthur arranged a visit to the Thorne penthouse under the pretense of retrieving Elena's final personal effects. As he stepped out of the elevator, the sheer scale of the opulence hit him like a physical blow. It was less a home than a museum, to wealth cold and impersonal, every surface polished to a mirror shine. A uniformed staff member led him to a small utility closet where a single cardboard box held Elena's belongings. Next to the box, shoved into a corner and destined for the trash, was a struggling orchid, its petals bruised and drooping. He recognized it from Elena's description of the plant she had tried to save. On impulse, he picked it up, its fragile weight a stark contrast to the heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the penthouse. He carried the box and the orchid out of that cold, sterile world, feeling like he had rescued two prisoners of war. Back in his office, he placed the orchid on his desk. It looked as out of place as he felt. Word of Arthur's involvement traveled quickly through the city's legal circles. Marcus Thorne was not a man who tolerated loose ends, and a feared Maid refusing a plea deal was the loosest of ends. Within days, the first volley from Thorne's legal team, a phalanx of $10,000 an hour lawyers from a firm with a lobby bigger than Arthur's entire office building, arrived. It was a motion to dismiss, 100 pages of dense legal arguments and character assassinations that painted Elena as a disgruntled thieving employee and Arthur as an ambulance-chasing parasite. Arthur spent 2 sleepless nights drafting a response, his coffee-fueled arguments feeling flimsy against their polished assault. He won barely, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The day after his motion was accepted, a new wave of paperwork arrived. Dozens of frivolous discovery requests, demands for every piece of paper he'd ever touched, and interrogatories so extensive and invasive they were clearly designed for one purpose: to bleed him dry. The war of attrition had begun. The intimidation soon bled from the professional into the personal. One evening, as he was leaving his office, a large, impeccably dressed man stepped out of the shadows. He didn't threaten Arthur, not directly. He simply offered friendly advice. "Mr. Thorne is a man who values loyalty and discretion," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "He believes this entire situation is a misunderstanding, one that could be very costly to prolong." The next morning, Arthur found the tires on his ancient sedan slashed. The message was clear. The old fear, the familiar, sickening dread that had settled in his bones after the Miller case, began to creep back. He was out of his depth, a lone swimmer caught in a riptide, and he could feel the current pulling him under. He started to doubt everything, wondering if he was just leading Elena down the same path to ruin he had led Robert Miller. He was in his office late one night, surrounded by mountains of paper that represented Thorne's infinite resources and his own dwindling hope. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and defeat. He stared at the rescued orchid on his desk. He'd been watering it, giving it a little of the sunlight that managed to pierce through his grimy window. New life, small and fragile, was budding at its stem, a stark contrast to the dead plant still moldering on the windowsill. The sight of it felt like an accusation. He was about to push the files away, to draft the call to Elena admitting defeat, when a soft knock came at his door. It was Elena herself, her face etched with concern. She wasn't there to ask for an update. In her hands, she held a large thermos and a paper bag. "I was visiting my aunt nearby," she said, her voice soft. "I thought you might be working late." She didn't mention the case. She simply poured a stream of fragrant, steaming soup into a cup and handed it to him, along with a thick slice of homemade bread. He hadn't realized how hungry he was. As he ate, the warmth spreading through him, she spoke not of hope or justice, but of her brother. "Leo gets so tired," she said, her gaze distant. "Some days he can barely sit up, but every single morning he makes me open the blinds. He says he doesn't want to miss the sunrise. He says no matter how bad the night was, the sun always keeps its promise." She looked at Arthur, her eyes clear and direct. "He has hope in tomorrow. I have hope in people." She paused. "Like you." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a plea. It was a simple, profound statement of faith. Faith in him. In that moment, something inside Arthur Vance, something he thought had died with Robert Miller, broke open. The fear, the cynicism, the carefully constructed walls of apathy, they all came crashing down. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about being the man Elena Ortiz believed him to be. It was about redemption. He finished the soup, the silence in the room now comfortable, companionable. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw the ghost in his eyes recede, replaced by a flicker of fire. "Okay, Elena," he said, his voice firm. "Let's fight." The next morning, Arthur attacked the case with a ferocity he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just a lawyer anymore. He was a crusader reborn. He dove into Marcus Thorne's past, spending hours in public records archives, poring over old business dealings and lawsuits. A pattern began to emerge. Thorne had a habit of firing high-level employees under suspicious, often trumped-up circumstances. The common thread? Every single one of them was fired just weeks before their substantial stock options were due to vest, saving Thorne millions. One name appeared more than others. David Chen, Thorne's former head of security, fired for insubordination 6 months ago. Arthur found him working a dead-end job managing a self-storage facility in the suburbs. Chen was wary, his eyes full of a fear Arthur recognized. He initially refused to talk, citing a non-disclosure agreement. An NDA signed under duress is unenforceable. Arthur pressed gently, sitting opposite Chen in a sterile, windowless office that smelled of cardboard and mothballs. "He can't silence you forever, David. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to help a good woman he's trying to destroy." Arthur told him about Elena, about her brother, about the frame-up. He spoke with a conviction that was impossible to fake. He saw a flicker of conflict in Chen's eyes, the weary resignation of a man who had tried to do the right thing and been punished for it. Finally, Chen sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. "He's a monster," he said, the words quiet but heavy with truth. "He documents everything, every slight, every perceived act of disrespect, every time he wins. He has this private journal, black leather, with a gold leaf eagle embossed on the cover. He calls it his ledger. He keeps it locked in a hidden safe in his study, behind a painting of a ship in a storm." Arthur felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the Achilles heel, the proof. But Thorne's lawyers were not idle. Sensing a shift in momentum, they played their trump card. In a pre-trial hearing, they brought up the Miller case. With surgical precision, they painted Arthur as an unstable, emotionally compromised lawyer with a personal vendetta against the wealthy and successful. They twisted his past tragedy into a weapon, and it worked. Judge Thompson, a man whose golf club membership was rumored to be a long-standing gift from Thorne, listened with a sympathetic frown. He looked at Arthur with open disdain. "Mr. Vance, your history does not inspire confidence," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He denied Arthur's request for Thorne's personal effects and records, including any journals, and then, to seal their fate, he set a trial date for 2 weeks away. It was an impossibly short timeline, a legal death sentence. Arthur walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the defeat pressing down on him. His phone rang. It was Elena, her voice choked with tears. "It's Leo," she sobbed. "The doctors, he took a turn for the worse. They have to do the surgery now, Arthur. They can't wait." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The clock wasn't just ticking anymore. It was screaming. He was out of time, out of options, and the two lives he was fighting for were closer to the edge than ever before. The courtroom was a dead end. Justice, Arthur now understood, would not be found in Judge Thompson's biased chamber. Thorne had built the walls of the legal system too high, his influence a poison in the well. If Arthur was going to win, he couldn't play by the rules of a game that was rigged against him. He had to write his own. He had one weapon left, the truth, and he had the perfect stage on which to reveal it. The annual Thorne Foundation Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, a night where Marcus Thorne laundered his reputation, basking in the glow of public adoration, while the city's elite paid homage to his manufactured benevolence. It was his fortress of ego, and Arthur planned to tear it down from the inside. The plan was desperate, a high-wire act with no safety net. It depended entirely on the fragile, explosive vanity of one man. Arthur sat with Elena in his office, the restored orchid blooming on his desk, a silent testament to what was possible. "He won't be able to resist," Arthur said, more to convince himself than her. "His narcissism is his weakness. If I can make him believe I have the journal, that I know his secrets, he'll have to prove he's in control." "The eagle," Elena said softly, her voice the calm center of the storm. "The gold leaf eagle on the cover. My father was a jeweler before he was a watchmaker. He taught me to notice details. I saw it once when I was dusting his study. He had left the safe open." That was it, the key, the detail that would make the bluff undeniable. 2 nights later, Arthur Vance, dressed in a rented tuxedo that felt like a costume, walked into the grand ballroom of the city's most expensive hotel. He looked like a different man. The haunted, defeated lawyer was gone, replaced by someone sharp, focused, and dangerous. By his side, Elena wore a simple, elegant dark blue dress, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to the glittering brittle glamour of the crowd. She was terrified, but her resolve was a steel rod at her back. They moved through the throng, ignoring the curious stares, their eyes fixed on their target. Marcus Thorne was holding court near the stage, a champagne flute in his hand, laughing with the mayor. He was untouchable, a king in his castle. Arthur intercepted him as he was stepping away from the group. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice calm and even, cutting through the ambient chatter. Thorne turned, his smile freezing when he saw Arthur and Elena. "I believe you're crashing my party, Vance. Security!" "I wouldn't," Arthur said, his voice dropping lower. "Not unless you want your other guests to hear about what's written in your ledger. The one with the gold leaf eagle on the cover." Thorne's face went pale. The bluff had landed. He stared at Arthur, his mind racing, trying to calculate the odds, the angles. He saw the unwavering certainty in Arthur's eyes and the quiet strength in Elena's. "I have spoken to several of your former employees," Arthur continued, pressing his advantage, the lie flowing smoothly. "The ones you wrote about. They are prepared to corroborate the contents of your journal in open court." That was it, the breaking point. The thought of his private victories, his secret contempt for the world, being exposed by this broken-down lawyer and a fired maid, was more than his ego could bear. His carefully constructed facade shattered. "You have nothing," he snarled, his voice a venomous whisper. He grabbed Arthur's arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled him toward a glass-walled study off the main ballroom. "You think you can threaten me?" Elena followed, her heart pounding, her expression a mask of calm resolve. As Thorne dragged Arthur into the room, Thorne's own lawyers, sensing disaster, hurried after them. Inside the study, Thorne's rage exploded. "You worm!" he spat at Arthur. "You come into my life, my party, and you dare to challenge me?" He paced like a caged animal, his movements jerky and violent. "She deserved it," he yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Elena, who stood silently in the doorway. "Her and all the others, they exist because I allow them to. They eat because I provide the scraps." To prove his absolute power, to show them how untouchable he truly was, he strode to a large painting of a ship in a storm, pulled it aside, and spun the dial on the hidden safe behind it. He yanked the safe open and pulled out the black leather journal. He waved it in Arthur's face. "This is mine. My thoughts are mine," he roared, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. "I built this city, and I can crush anyone in it who disrespects me." The confession, raw and absolute, hung in the air. But it wasn't just the people in the room who heard it. Through the glass walls, the gala guests had turned to watch the drama unfold. And standing among them, a small group of reporters, tipped off by Arthur an hour earlier, were filming everything, their camera lights like strobes, capturing the tyrant's downfall. Thorne's lawyers stared, aghast. The king had just abdicated his throne in a fit of pique. Arthur said nothing. He simply looked at Thorne, then at the reporters, a grim satisfaction on his face. Elena closed her eyes, and a single tear of relief, hot and cleansing, traced a path down her cheek. The fallout was a media firestorm. The video of Thorne's confession went viral, a spectacular implosion that captivated the city. The charges against Elena were dropped the next morning. Empowered by his public humiliation, other victims, David Chen first among them, came forward, their non-disclosure agreements now worthless. A massive class action lawsuit was formed, with Arthur Vance at the helm. Marcus Thorne's empire, built on fear and intimidation, began to crumble under the weight of his own hubris. Months later, Arthur's office was unrecognizable. The dust was gone, the files were organized, and the space was filled with light and the quiet hum of purpose. He had established the Vance Justice Foundation, a nonprofit firm with a single mission: to fight for the powerless. The thriving orchid sat on the corner of his new uncluttered desk. He was visiting Elena and a recovering Leo in their modest but bright apartment. Leo, though still thin, was laughing, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. On the windowsill, catching the afternoon sun, sat the small, hand-carved wooden bird that had started it all. Elena handed Arthur an envelope. "It's not much," she said, "but it's the first donation to the foundation." He opened it. Inside was a check for $100. It felt heavier, more valuable than any settlement he had ever won. He looked at Elena, at the unshakable hope that had pulled him back from the abyss, and for the first time in years, his smile was genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. He hadn't just won a case, he had reclaimed his soul.
Thank you for taking a quiet moment with us. Every story is a journey, and we're so glad you joined us for this one.
We believe stories are a way to connect, even when we're apart. If you felt a connection to this tale, we invite you to subscribe and become part of our growing circle.
Our question for you today is, what's a simple moment of peace you've experienced this week?
Share it in the comments. Let's fill this space with serene moments.
Until the next story, be well.